There is an invisible pattern that keeps most people in exactly the same place for years, sometimes even decades, without them realizing it. It's not a lack of ability. It's not a lack of opportunity. And in most cases, it's not even a lack of effort. It's a cycle. A silent cycle, repetitive, automatic. And the most dangerous part is that it feels normal. You wake up, start your day, think about what you need to do, feel a slight pressure, maybe even a desire to change. But something happens. You delay. Not consciously. Not as a clear decision. But as a small deviation. I'll do it later. Today isn't the best day. I'll start tomorrow. And this is the first point of the cycle. Delay disguised as logic. Now, pay attention to what comes next. You don't do what needed to be done. And that creates discomfort. A feeling that you're falling behind. But instead of using that as momentum, you try to relieve the discomfort. How? By distracting yourself. Filling your time with easier things. Seeking small, quick rewards. And here comes the second point of the cycle. Immediate relief. You trade progress for comfort. And in the moment, it feels like it worked. But soon after, comes the third point. Guilt. You realize you didn't do what you needed to do. You feel like you could have done better. You start to pressure yourself. And that pressure doesn't push you forward. It weighs you down. It paralyzes you. Because instead of generating action, it generates exhaustion. Now comes the fourth point. You try to compensate. You think, now I'll do it differently. Now it will work. But that decision doesn't come from clarity. It comes from frustration. And decisions made emotionally rarely last. So you might even start, but you don't sustain it. And the cycle repeats. You delay. You distract yourself. You feel guilt. You try to compensate. And you delay again. And just like that, days go by. Now understand the long-term impact of this. It's not that you're doing nothing. It's that you never sustain enough to generate results. You're always starting, but almost never continuing. And those who keep restarting never accumulate. Now here's a deeper point. This cycle isn't just behavior. It becomes identity. You start to see yourself as someone who doesn't finish what they start, gets distracted easily, loses focus, and the more you reinforce that, the harder it becomes to break free. Because now it's not just what you do, it's who you believe you are, and that keeps the cycle alive. Now let's break this with clarity. The problem isn't lack of discipline. It's lack of interruption of the pattern. Because as long as you don't interrupt the cycle, you will always return to it. So the question changes. It's no longer, how do I get more motivated? It becomes, at what moment do I need to act differently? And the answer is simple. At the beginning of the cycle. At the moment you think about delaying. Right there. Not later. Because later, the cycle has already gained momentum. So the first adjustment is direct. You notice the urge to delay? Small, but immediate. No negotiation. No trying to improve the decision. Just do it. Now the second adjustment. You need to stop using distraction as a reward. Because every time you do that, you teach your brain that avoiding is better than advancing. And that reinforces the cycle. So the rule changes. First execute, then reward. Simple. Now the third point. Lower your expectations. Because many times you get stuck. Not because of laziness, but because you want to do it perfectly. And that creates resistance. So instead of thinking, I need to do everything, think, what is the smallest possible step right now? And do it. Because movement creates movement. Now the fourth point. Stop trying to solve everything emotionally. Discipline is not a feeling. It's a pattern. You don't need to feel like doing it. You need to act even without feeling like it. And when you do that repeatedly, something changes. The cycle begins to break. Now, pay attention to this. At the beginning, it will feel strange, uncomfortable. because you are going against your old pattern. But that discomfort is exactly what indicates change. Now think long term. If you start acting where you used to delay, execute where you used to avoid, continue where you used to stop, what happens? You start to accumulate. And accumulation creates results. Now an important point. You don't need to break the entire cycle at once. You need to break one moment of it. Just one. And repeat that every day. Because small consistency beats rare intensity. Now let's close this with total clarity. The cycle that keeps you stuck is not visible, but it is predictable. And everything that is predictable can be interrupted. The moment you see it, you have a choice. You can repeat the pattern or act differently. And that decision happens every single day, in small moments, not in big promises. Now the final question. The next time the urge to delay appears, what will you do? Because that answer defines whether you stay in the same cycle or actually begin to break free from it. No announcement, no perfection, no waiting for the perfect moment. Just one thing, action at the right moment. And that moment is always now. And if you truly understand this, then you need to face a truth that very few people accept. The cycle does not continue because of lack of opportunity. It continues because of repetition. Repetition of small wrong decisions that seem insignificant in the moment, but they accumulate, and they create exactly the life you are living today. Now think about this clearly. It's not one big mistake that keeps you stuck. It's small daily concessions. That task you left for later. That decision you avoided. That distraction you chose. Individually, they seem like nothing. But together, they form a pattern. And patterns create destiny. Now, pay attention to this. You don't wake up one day stuck. You become stuck little by little. Repeating the same behavior. Thinking the same way. Reacting the same way. And the most dangerous part is that over time it becomes automatic. You don't even question it anymore. You just execute the pattern. Now here comes a critical point. The cycle gets stronger when you try to escape it. Yes, because the more you avoid what needs to be done, the heavier it becomes. And the heavier it becomes, the more you avoid it. It's a snowball effect. And that explains why simple tasks start to feel difficult. Not because they are difficult, but because they were postponed for too long. Now connect this to your reality. How many things today feel big, but started small? How many decisions are you delaying now? That will soon turn into problems. This is the invisible cost of the cycle. Now another point that keeps all of this alive. You overestimate the future and underestimate the present. You think, I'll do it better later. I'll have more focus later. I'll be more prepared later. But that later never comes because you carry the same pattern with you. So it's not about the moment. It's about behavior. If you don't change now, you won't change later. Simple as that. Now let's go deeper. There is a very common illusion, thinking you need a big moment to change your life. But that doesn't exist. What exists is the repetition of small changes, almost invisible, but consistent. And that is the opposite of what the cycle does. The cycle makes you wait for intensity, while the solution requires consistency. Now, pay attention to this. The cycle traps you in emotion. You only act when you feel motivated. You only start when you feel excited. You only continue when you feel comfortable. And that makes you unstable. Because emotions change every day, but patterns remain. So the key is not controlling emotion. It is building a pattern independent of it. Now a point that changes the game. You need to stop trusting what you feel and start trusting what you decided. Because feelings change, decisions sustain, and when you start acting based on decisions, even without feeling like it, you create something rare, self-reliability, and that breaks the cycle. Because now you don't depend on how you woke up. You execute anyway. Now understand this. Every time you do what you said you would do, you strengthen your identity. And every time you don't, you weaken it. So it's not just about results. It's about who you are becoming. Now let's be direct. The cycle only exists because you allow it. And this is not criticism. It's responsibility. Because if it was built by you, it can be broken by you. But it requires something specific. Awareness plus immediate action. Without that, you go back to autopilot. Now here's a practical adjustment. Start identifying the trigger. What is the exact moment when you go off track? Is it when you pick up your phone? Is it when you start overthinking? Is it when you feel discomfort? Find it, because the cycle always starts with a trigger. And if you control the beginning, you avoid the rest. Now another powerful point. You need to reduce your reaction time. Right now, between impulse and action, there is a gap, and that's where you lose. Overthinking, justifying, delaying. So shorten it. You think, you act. No internal debate, no negotiation. That eliminates the cycle at its root. Now think about the long-term effect of this. Small actions taken at the right moment, every day, without interruption. Create a continuous line, and that line becomes progress. Progress becomes results. Results change your reality. But it all starts in a small moment, almost invisible. Now let's close this with precision. The cycle that holds you back is not strong by nature. It is strong by repetition. And what is repeated can be replaced by another pattern. A pattern where you act when needed. You continue even without feeling like it. You finish what you start. And when this pattern is installed, everything changes. Because now, you are no longer fighting the cycle. You are operating above it. And that puts you on another level. Now the decision is simple. Not easy, but simple. Keep repeating what you already know. Or start repeating something different. And that choice happens today, in the next moment, in the next decision. No announcement, no perfect preparation, just one attitude. Interrupt the old pattern and act differently, even if it's small, but immediate, because that's how cycles are broken, and that's how a new life begins. And now that you can see the cycle more clearly, there is a point that defines whether you will truly break free from it, or simply understand it and stay in the same place. Because understanding changes nothing. Awareness without action becomes frustration. And the more you understand and don't act, the heavier it becomes. Because now you know. And even so, you don't do it. So the game changes levels. It's no longer about discovering. It's about executing. Now, pay attention to this. There is a specific moment when everything can change. It's not when you are motivated. It's not when everything is aligned. It's not when you feel ready. It's exactly when you don't feel like doing it. When the urge to avoid appears. When the desire to delay shows up. When discomfort arises. That is the point. Right there, you have two options. Repeat the old pattern, or create a new one. And that decision takes seconds. But the impact lasts much longer. Now let's go even deeper. The cycle is also fueled by narrative. The way you talk to yourself keeps everything active. I'm just like this. I can never stay consistent. I start and then I stop. These phrases seem harmless, but they are dangerous because they become identity. And identity controls behavior. So as long as you reinforce that story, you act according to it. Now the adjustment here is direct. Stop describing your past and start building your pattern. You don't need to declare that you've already changed. You need to act differently and let repetition build the proof. Now another point that holds many people back. You want to feel confident before acting. But confidence doesn't come first. Confidence comes after. After action. after repetition, after consistency. So while you wait for confidence, you remain stuck. And those who are acting are building real confidence in practice. Now understand this. Action creates evidence, and evidence creates confidence, not the other way around. Now an even deeper point. You need to stop trying to fix your entire life. That creates pressure, and pressure creates paralysis. The focus needs to be different. Execute the next step. That's it. Just the next one. Because those who try to solve everything freeze. Those who solve the next step move forward. Now think about this practically. If you only do what needs to be done today, without thinking about everything else, what happens after a week? After a month? After a year? You accumulate it. And accumulation solves what once seemed big. Now another critical point. You need to stop rewarding yourself for intention. Planning doesn't count. Thinking doesn't count. Wanting doesn't count. Only what gets done counts. And that changes your relationship with the process, because it removes the illusion of progress and puts you into real movement. Now let's be direct. The cycle also survives because you negotiate too much with yourself. You leave space for excuses. Just today. I'll make up for it later. It's not a big deal. And that just today repeats and becomes a pattern. So the rule changes. Less negotiation, more execution. You decided? Do it. No room for exceptions. Now another point that almost no one realizes. You need to learn how to finish. Because starting is easy. Continuing is rare. But finishing is what creates results. And finishing requires persistence. Even when it's not interesting. Even when it's not exciting. Even when no one is watching. And that's exactly where most people quit. And the cycle restarts. Now imagine the opposite. You start. You continue. And you finish. Once. Then again. Then again. That changes your identity. Now you're no longer someone who tries. You are someone who completes. And that completely changes the game. Now, pay attention to this. You don't need more information. You need more repetition of what you already know. Because the problem is not lack of knowledge. It's lack of application. You already know what needs to be done. The real question is, are you doing it? Now let's close this at an even deeper level. There is a huge difference between living reactively and living by execution. Those who react live on autopilot. They respond to mood. They respond to the environment. They respond to circumstances. Those who execute follow a pattern, regardless of how the day feels. And that creates stability. And stability creates growth. Now the final truth. The cycle that traps you has no power on its own. It only exists because you repeat it. And that is good news, because it means it can be replaced, not with a massive change, but with small different decisions, repeated every single day. Now the decision is clear. It's not about changing everything. It's about changing now, in this moment, in the next action. No waiting, no over-preparing, no overthinking. Just interrupt the old pattern and do what needs to be done, even without feeling like it, even if it's small, but done, and then repeat, and repeat, and repeat, until the new pattern becomes automatic. And when that happens, you will realize something simple, but powerful. It was never about lack of ability. It was never about lack of opportunity. It was always about the pattern you chose to repeat. And from now on, it is no longer invisible. Now it is a choice. And choice, when repeated, becomes destiny. So decide and start. No. And when you truly start to act this way, without waiting, without negotiating, without depending on motivation, something changes at a deeper level. You begin to regain control. Not control of the world, but control of yourself. And that changes everything. Because the greatest prison is not external. It's internal. It's not trusting yourself. It's knowing what needs to be done and not doing it. And when you start to follow through on what you decide, even in small things, you rebuild that trust. And this is cumulative. Now, pay attention to this. Self-confidence does not come from positive thinking. It comes from evidence. And evidence comes from repeated action. So every time you execute, you send a clear signal to your mind. I do what I say, and that signal, repeated over time, creates a solid foundation. Now you don't need to convince yourself. You know, because you've already done it. Now here comes a point that separates those who change from those who remain stuck. Consistency when no one is watching. Because it's easy to act when there is pressure, when there are expectations, when someone is observing. But the cycle is broken in invisible moments, when it's just you and the choice to do or not to do. And that's where the pattern is defined. Now understand this deeply. If you win in the invisible, you don't lose in the visible, because the external result is just a reflection of what was repeated internally. Now another point that changes the game. You need to learn not to restart from zero, because every time you fail, there is an automatic tendency. Since I messed up, I'll leave it for later, and that throws you back into the cycle. But the rule needs to be different. You failed. Correct it quickly. No drama. No excessive guilt. No quitting. Because the problem was never failing. The problem is stopping. Now think about this. If you maintain continuity, even with failures, you keep accumulating. And those who accumulate win. Now another important point. You need to protect your focus. Because today, everything competes for your attention. Everything tries to pull you away from what matters. And if you are not intentional, you fall back into the cycle without noticing. So start filtering what you consume, who you talk to, where you place your energy. Because focus is not just about doing. It's also about avoiding what pulls you off track. Now let's take it one level higher. You need to stop romanticizing intensity. Doing a lot one day and nothing the next doesn't work. What works is doing what matters every single day, without interruption, without excuses. Now connect this to wealth, results, growth. Everything comes from accumulation. And accumulation only happens with consistency, not with bursts. Now a decisive point. You need to redefine victory. Victory is not when everything goes right. Victory is when you do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel. If you did it, you won the day. Simple. And when you start winning days, you start winning weeks, months, years. And that builds a different life. Now let's close with total clarity. The cycle that used to trap you was automatic. But the new pattern needs to be intentional at the beginning until it also becomes automatic. And that requires repetition, consistent, without interruption. Now the final truth. There is no transformation without discomfort, but there is growth inside it. So when discomfort appears, don't interpret it as a sign to stop. Interpret it as a sign of change, because that's exactly where you are leaving the old pattern behind. Now the decision remains daily. Simple, direct, practical. Do or don't do. Continue or stop. Execute or delay. And each of these choices either moves you forward or keeps you exactly where you are. No mystery, no secret, just pattern. So from this point on, you don't need to look for more explanations. You already understand. Now it's about living differently, even if small, but consistent, even without motivation, but continuous, until what today requires effort becomes natural. And when that happens, you won't even recognize your old self anymore, because the cycle has been broken. And in its place, there is a new pattern, stronger, more stable, more conscious. And that is what sustains a different life. Now don't go back. Keep going. Because now, you already know exactly what to do.